What's up, traders? Matt from the Trade Brigade here doing a broad market analysis for the day. We'll cover SPY the Qs and IWM. On the left-hand side, as always, we've got the daily time frame, and on the right-hand side, the 30-minute intraday time frame. First of all, SPY, what do we see on the daily? Certainly breaking down out of the 3-day balance that we had in play that we discussed over on the main channel video from Sunday. You can see we also suffered a gap down, so that's pretty significant as well. We've closed a strong red bar to the downside dead on the lows of today's session, which also took out this horizontal level and the daily 50 SMA, which of course is the blue line on our charts. So the main concern with the SPY daily time frame as of right now is not necessarily the fact that we won't find a higher low. I do think it's very likely that we find some sort of higher low, whether or not it's at the support trend line, slightly below the support trend line, slightly above the support trend line, that's fine. But the concern is now that to make a new higher high, there is a substantial amount of work that needs to be done to get back closer to that 462 level. So there's obviously a lot of things that stand in the way of that. The first one would be breaking back into this 3-day balance right here, aka recapturing 443.50. That would be the first step if there is going to be any sort of turnaround and this turns into a look below and fail, right? We would know then the top end of the range is the target at 450.25. Based on today's close, I would say that does not strike me as a highly probable situation into at least tomorrow's session. We can reevaluate later on in the week, but at least as of what we have right now, doesn't look like my first sort of thought. On the 30-minute time frame, what else can we learn about the price action? Well, clearly, again, here's your gap down on this morning's session. We worked a little ways into the gap, but there was very little price acceptance in that area. Clearly, it was lower from there, and the price acceptance happened very, very sideways day until the last power hour, and of course, the market dumped just a little bit. So overall, price acceptance was lower. It was a bearish day out there. It's not like the buyers really responded to these lower prices and pushed it back higher for that inventory correction and gap fill. That did not happen. So there's a real, I want to say, lack of aggressive buyers of this pullback as of right now in the S&P 500, and everything's basically pointing to the possibility for continuation to the downside. My next major support here on the SPY daily is at 437. We discussed anything that breaks that. Of course, support trendline is coming into play next, but we want to see what the context of that break is. We discussed that over on the main channel video last night, so no need to rehash that. So again, 437 is the next downside level. Anything underneath would require, again, a serious reevaluation of the charts to determine whether or not this pullback is still just a pullback. Anyways, moving along, QQQ is up next for our NASDAQ 100. What do we see over here on the Qs? Excuse the blue lines. I'll get rid of those now. Those, of course, had to do with our opening morning trade with the gap. We covered it on the live stream. Regardless, you can see a majority of that gap is still open. It did not fill hardly any of it, unlike the SPY, which had a little bit of a fill to the upside. Nonetheless, we are firmly underneath the neckline of this prior double bottom. So, a much more different and more bearish picture here in our NASDAQ and tech stocks. We know that tech has been relatively weak for quite some time. Remember that before the S&P, was already making lower highs from the all-time high. I mean, not to say that anyone would have known that this relative weakness would have carried forward this far into the future, but nonetheless, it's been this way for quite some time, right? So that has not changed. Obviously, upside objectives would be if we can move above today's high, 346. We're looking for the gap to fill, and I'll make those lines yellow eventually, but your fill is up around 348.50 and the daily 50 SMA. Again, today's daily bar closed dead at the lows underneath the 50 SMA on the gap down with no acceptance into the gap strikes me as bearish. On the way higher, we had very thin structure in here. It would strike me as 335 being the next critical area that the QQQ needs to sort of gravitate towards if we're going to find any sort of structural support. Anything that reverses early in here, I don't really see any reason to be fishing for longs in that area, noting that we don't really have anything that would support that from a structural standpoint, right? So if we come into 335, fine, that's where you might want to start looking for reversals, but if we don't get there in the first place, the patience play is for this first gap here, and then again, recapturing this 3-day range would be, one step at a time looking forward from there. So that's the bull setup. As of right now, it looks weak, closing dead on the lows of today's session. Taking a quick look at the 30-minute time frame, you can see something very similar to the SPY, right? Very sideways price action into the bulk of the day, really. It was just a price acceptance at these lower prices, and then boom, power hour comes along, and they sort of dump it into the close a little bit. Again, a relatively weak sign of what could be to come here, basically sellers in control, right? There was not enough buying activity in this area to overwhelm and push prices higher. It never happened, right? So this definitely is resulting in much more than a quote unquote healthy pullback at this point in time. And again, if you want to keep it simple, you can take out the fibs from the lows all the way on up to the highs, well underneath the 38.2, now firmly underneath the 50%. Line in the sand is always the 61.8. If you start violating the 61.8 and getting acceptance underneath, that's where the 100% retracement becomes highly probable. So as of right now, those are some objectives here in the QQQ, and the 30-minute time frame would confirm the bearish activity that we saw today. Let's move along and round out the broad market with IWM, none other than Russell 2000 and the small caps. What do we see here? So zooming in. Certainly not as aggressive of a gap down, and it also filled that gap. And I guess this is best illustrated on the 30-minute time frame. So we open here, technically underneath the lows of Fridays, but we fill the gap, get some price acceptance in yesterday's range, fail, lower high, close kind of at this neckline. So going forward on the smaller time frames, and I know we're skipping the daily, but this just strikes me as important and worth talking about here. You could start to look at this as a double top, right? Just failure basically at the prior day's lows. It's not exact. It's just failure to accept inside of yesterday's range with a clear lower high, equal lows down here. If we flush today's low, so let's just basically call it 196.50 area. If we start getting price acceptance under that tomorrow, that's where we could easily rotate back down closer to 193.50. So about a 3-point range here to trade for in IWM and small caps, if that's what you're looking to do here. For me, I generally just look at this as a risk on, risk off type signal for our marketplace, and this is certainly starting to scream risk off, right? We are well beneath the support trend line. We failed to accept back into the prior day's range, and it does look like it could move lower. Obviously, inverted hammer here. We can see that on the intraday with the two big failed tops in here. It's bearish, right? There's no way around it. It's certainly bearish here in IWM as this sort of sell has been unfolding. Notice that volume is, I would say it's kind of on par with average, if not slightly higher than on par. And generally speaking, when you're looking for consolidation or pullbacks to buy, you want to see volume mute, right? You want to see lower volume. And that has not been the case, which again, just lends itself to this being more than just a pullback here. We know, and we've talked about this till we're blue in the face. There's your head and shoulders, 204. Nothing exciting in IWM happens until we can recapture 204 and get some price acceptance up and over that. Directly above us right now, 201 is resistant. This gap overhead is resistant. 204 is going to be resistant on the first touch, I would imagine, because of course it was the flush point from here. There's possibility for something that does this. The chart just doesn't look good. It's not screaming risk on for equities right now. So again, maybe this also ties into what we were discussing in the SPY and QQQ, that the outlook doesn't really look so great for this to be a viable pullback, and maybe it does deteriorate into a more significant downdraft across our marketplace. So that's going to wrap up the video. If you enjoyed it or learned anything new, let me know in the comments section or by giving the video a thumbs up. Don't forget our main channel is linked in the description, and all of that being said, I wish you a green trading week. So I wanted to pop in at the very end, guys, and just mention and acknowledge that, yes, I didn't upload any videos last week, mainly because the nice weather has been rolling around here inside of southern New England. And for me, spending time outdoors is really something that I value, and I think my time is better spent outdoors with friends, family, walking the dog, all that good stuff, as opposed to sort of sitting down and, getting back to the desk after a day of trading and uploading some analysis videos. So over the course of the spring, summer, and we'll see how much of the fall, maybe expect a couple fewer videos per day. It doesn't necessarily mean that, I'm not interested in pursuing this channel or uploading ideas. It just means times are changing. Obviously, it's nice weather outside, and I don't want to have to give up plans just to come back and record some afternoon analysis. So with all of that being said, I hope that doesn't discourage you from doing your own trading, your own analysis, but maybe just expect a couple fewer videos over the course of, the springtime weather. So if you get one video, that's probably, going to be about average. If you get 3 or 5, maybe it's a really rainy and terrible day outside, and I'm opting to stay in, do some analysis. Maybe I just have the feeling like, hey, charts are looking pretty interesting this afternoon. Let's talk about them. And then if you get nothing, I'm probably out walking the dog. You know that, right? So that's what I wanted to acknowledge here at the very end of the video. I look forward to the summertime, obviously, as I'm sure many of us do here in New England. And with all that being said, this is truly going to wrap up the video. If you made it all the way to the end, I appreciate you as always, and I look forward to you staying around the channel.